Hey guys, today I'll be giving a presentation based on the report Bank CEO Materialism, Risk Controls, Culture and Terror Risk. It is a topic of interest to me, particularly because I feel this topic does have huge implications on the outer world and policymakers. Alongside this, it does answer a few questions regarding things such as worldwide crises that have occurred in the recent years. Now, what I'll be running throughout this presentation is first of all the introduction today, which outlines why this is the topic of interest, followed by the data and results presented by the authors, the discussion, which analyzes the results and what they actually imply, and then finally I'll be finishing off with the concluding statements.
Okay, so first of all, we're just going to look at why is this a particular topic of interest and why has there been study going into the behavioral traits of influential and significant individuals within the banking sector. Now, one of the main aspects of this particular topic is materialism. Now, if you look at it at a different aspect now, traditionally materialism, it was a topic of social and philosophical concern. So it's too philosophical to allow empirical hypothesis testing. However, really recently it's become a topic of economic psychology, which allows us to examine the effects of individual differences on economic behavior. So it's only become a recent phenomena where we can actually investigate into this particular subject within within the respects of economics. So it's become a recent phenomenon, which obviously has allowed particular researchers to look into this new topic and what implications it has, as you said over here, on the behavior of certain individuals, as we will obviously look throughout the rest of the course of the presentation. Also, over the recent period, there has been a massive shift in the prevalence of materialistic CEOs. Now, one thing to point out here, as we will see in the next slide, is that the shift in the prevalence of materialistic CEOs, it came around a specific time. The time it came around was post 1994. Now, during this period is a period of deregulation. Certain acts were passed to deregulate the financial market, which has therefore led to changing pattern in the way that the financial industry has been behaving. So obviously, this shift in prevalence coincides with this, which therefore generates more questions that specific events have happened, which has therefore caused the shift in the prevalence of materialistic CEOs, which has therefore caused other things. So it's just trying to find a cause and effect here to see what implications it does have. Hence why a lot of research has been going into this particular topic. Also, another important thing as to why this is a topic of interest is we are obviously, as it says here, we are studying about influential and significant individuals. Specifically, we are looking at the chief executives. Now, they have massive influence power in terms of shaping the culture and behavior within banks. Now, for banks specifically, there are two key channels to observe this influence and power, which is choice of risk management policy and the corporate culture. As we see throughout the rest of the course of this presentation, we'll see how materialistic CEOs impact these two key channels and what implications it does have. And then, of course, lastly, it just allows us to see why banks and materialistic CEOs behave differently relative to banks and non-materialistic CEOs, specifically in regards to risk controls and culture. Now, this slide here, now I just wanted to show you guys sort of the drastic shift in the prevalence of materialistic CEOs within the banking industry. So it's just a graphical representation of the trend in CEO materialism within the banking industry relative to the non-banking industry. As we can see here, the percentage of materialistic bank CEOs, it actually peaked in 2004, but post 1994 is when it started to steadily increase. And that sort of coincides with the deregulation acts that were passed post 1994. So it may have been obviously due to those deregulation acts being passed, which has therefore caused this shift in attitude in terms of the CEOs within the banking sector. But it just sort of puts it into image. We can see the drastic change between the banking industry and the non-banking industry, and how there's been a massive increase in materialistic CEOs within the banking sector, which obviously has led to so many questions being asked, hence why the report on this particular topic.
So we just move on to the data and results section here. So we'd first of all look at the materialism measure and how the authors use to actually measure materialism. So first of all, we'll start off by defining what is materialism so we can get a good understanding. Now, within this particular context, it can be defined as what people care about and what is important to them. So ultimately, it's sort of like how individuals have like an attachment or a desired relationship with the worldly goods. Sometimes possessions of these goods that they care about can act as a primary goal for their well-being. So that's how we sort of define materialism within this particular context. Now, to construct their measure for CEO materialism, the authors adopted a revealed preference approach, whereby it's sort of a value system which ultimately revealed the CEO's observable off the job behavior, which therefore in turn would reflect their corporate behavior. So that's how they are used to measure materialism within this particular report. Now, CEOs were identified as being materialistic then if they had ownership of luxurious goods such as expensive cars, yachts, boats, real estate, etc., which is used as a manifestation as relatively high materialism. Now, ultimately, obviously, with all these measures, they want to investigate how risk management policies, corporate culture, and tail risk all vary with CEO materialism. So, like, sort of investigating how the concentration of materialistic CEOs sort of weakens risk management policies, the corporate culture, and how this can also increase aggressive risk taking and opportunistic behavior, which we will see throughout the rest of the slides, which our results tables show later on.
Right, so what we will go in now then is the first results table here. So this particular slide shows how the risk management index varies with the CEO type, i.e. materialistic or non-materialistic CEOs. So this bit highlighted is the bit that we are specifically interested in. So the results table here shows that for all four models here, the coefficients, they are negative and statistically significant for the material variable. Now, ultimately, this provides very strong evidence of a significant and negative association between the CEO materialism and the strength of risk management functions. So, what this sort of implies is having a materialistic CEO is associated with having a low risk management function policy, and we'll go on later to understand what this implication has of having a low risk management function, because as we stated earlier, it was one of the influencing channels that we've seen as the effect of a materialistic CEO has on the overall bank. But here is the first results data table, which shows there is a negative correlation between CEO materialism and risk management function. So the next results table that we'll move on to is the results table for CEO materialism and bank culture. So what this results table actually examines is the effect of the CEO type on the behaviors of other executive and employees within the organization. Now, the authors used insider trading activities of other senior executives and employees as a representation of how corporate culture can infiltrate an organization and manifest itself through the actions of the organization employees. So the bit highlighted in red is the particular variable that we are interested in here. So as we can see, the variable insider trading and bailout, it is positive and significant for banks run by materialistic CEOs. On the other hand, it is actually insignificant for banks run by materialistic CEOs. So here we can see the drastic difference on whether insider trading will be taken within a bank or not based on the CEO type. So in essence, it just shows obviously how a culture of a weakened board monitoring led by materialistic CEOs would actually lead to the bank to engage in insider trading, purely because the way this happens is that materialistic CEOs, they would naturally adopt a lax control system, which leads to heightened equity-based incentives among the employees and executives, and this is of course done through the influencing mechanism of the CEO to the corporate culture. So we'll move on to the last results table here. Now this results table, what it looks to investigate or analyze is the relationship between CEO materialism and bank risk outcomes. Now, there are two particular measures for the bank risk outcomes that the authors particularly analyze here, and that is tail risk of the individual bank and the marginal expected shortfall, or for MES in short. Now, in terms of what we are looking at in this table here, so in columns 1 and 3, it includes the variable RMI only, whereas in columns 2 and 4 it includes RMI, but it also includes the variable material here. So we want to look at the effect of these on the bank risk outcomes. So if we look at the bottom bit of the table that is highlighted here, so we're looking at the RMI variable, which is risk management indices, and we're looking at columns 1 and 3. So what we can see here, the coefficients are negative and they are significant for the RMI on obviously both tail risk and the MES. So it is obviously significant for the measures of downside risk of the bank. If we look at the top bit of the highlighted table, so what we can see here is that the material variable, but obviously we're looking at columns 2 and 4, so it includes the material variable and the RMI variable. But material, so interestingly here, the material variable here is statistically significant and it is positive. Now this suggests that RMI loses significance here because the material variable is significant and positive. Now, one interpretation of this result here is sort of that the CEO materialism, it has a first order effect on a bank's downside risk, but one of the channels it does this through, where it impacts the downside risk, is the bank's risk management functions, or the RMI in other words. So it suggests that CEO materialism, it is an essential factor, as they are the key person in influencing the bank's risk management function. So overall, it just shows that materialism is a very significant factor in determining the bank risk outcome. So we just quickly run on to the discussion now. So what do these results suggest? So ultimately, materialistic CEOs, as we can see here from the evidence gathered, that they sort of generate a laxer corporate culture whereby employees, they'll behave, more opportunistically and take on more risks, such as engaging in insider trading just to earn abnormal returns because of this materialistic attitude revolving around the bank. The CEO materialism, it may well explain the weaker risk management function that we see in the relationship between the two variables, and the more aggressive and diverse risk-taking behavior, such as insider trading. So which was one of the things that we obviously mentioned in the earlier slides, that the effect of CEO materialism on risk management functions and the corporate culture. Also, banks with materialistic CEOs, they have significantly more downside tail risks relative to banks with non-materialistic CEOs, which implies obviously they're more likely to suffer from high capital losses and bank failure, which is obviously sort of ties in with the definition, as we mentioned, of what is sort of, tail risk. And then CEO materialism is a crucial component that impacts the risk management function of banks, which therefore affects the bank's downside tail risk, which is obviously.
So we'll now finally move on to the conclusion and make our final comments based on all the information and the results that we have seen throughout this presentation. So ultimately, what this sort of report investigated is how the prevalence of materialistic CEOs within the banking sector evolved over time, and how the risk management policies, the behavior of non-executives, and the bank tail risk varied with CEO materialism. So that's ultimately what we've been looking at throughout the course of this presentation. Now, to make these final comments, and so the results, they do imply that materialistic CEOs, they weaken the risk management functions and the corporate culture of the banks more so as compared to non-materialistic CEOs. As you've seen from the results, obviously that was the correlation that we've seen between the variables. Now, also, banks with the materialistic CEOs, they were more highly exposed to downside risk relative to banks with non-materialistic CEOs due to the weakened risk management function. So we've seen that with the first order effect that CEO materialism had on the risk management functions, and then ultimately, therefore, exposing the bank to more risk than usual compared to, if a bank was run by a non-materialistic CEO.
The results are also very consistent with the fact that CEOs they play a very important role in shaping the bank's corporate culture and behavior of the employees. As you stated towards the start of this presentation, that CEOs they are very important individuals within the bank and they have huge influence and power that trickles down through to the every single employee within the organization that they do run. So therefore, it just goes in hand that the results are consistent with the fact that CEOs, because they're such an influential individual within the bank, the characteristics that they have will therefore obviously be observable among the rest of the employees in the bank. So overall, the evidence it just suggests that CEO materialism it can influence a bank's risk management policy and the corporate culture as they influence the shape of the bank's outcomes and culture through the decisions and strategic choices that they make, which is obviously done via the influencing mechanism. Um, so they are the results of the scene. They are very consistent in what we sort of discussed at the start of the presentation, and overall, the results on the shifting composition of materialistic CEO style characteristics are likely to be of great interest to regulators and policymakers in the future.